So I'm Dustin Bennett. I manage our application platforms and developer tools teams at the Home Depot. I've been in mobile development, came up as a software engineer all the way back, 2004, 2005. I did some undergraduate research at MIT on augmented reality on PDAs at the time, and have managed the mobile team at the Home Depot prior to coming into my current role. So what I'm going to go through here today, I'll give you a little bit of a overview and background of the mobile landscape at the Home Depot. So when I say the mobile landscape here, I'm not talking about the consumer app that you download on your phone, but more the devices that we have in the stores to support the sales process. A little bit of the history of the device, big architecture change that we went through. Pivotal and PCF was a big piece of that, but there are a couple other components that you'll see as well. After that, I'll go through some specific examples, kind of run through an application real quick, some pain points we went through in the design and development, and then talk a little bit about what's next and what we have on the horizon. So first off, we have these mobile devices in the stores. We call them FIRST phones. FIRST is an acronym that we use for customer service. You'll see it in training a lot. It's find, inquire, respect, solve, and thank. At the Home Depot, we really pride ourselves on being customer first, customer experience, user experience. Hopefully all of you go to your local Home Depot 5 or 6 times in a weekend, so hopefully you're getting good service there. I know there's still some friction in the process, but we're continually working to get that out. So what the devices do, you'll see if you go into a store, the associates that are wearing the aprons have these devices in their hands. And we've got about 20 to 30 line of business applications that run on these. Most of those are developed internally. Some of them are off the shelf, but they do everything from inventory tracking to line busting at the point of sale to receiving freight. Obviously the phone and the walkie-talkie. So if you call into a Home Depot, you're dialing one of these extensions. What this really does is helps the associates stay on the floor, engaged with customers, and not have to go back and forth to a computer room or back and forth to a service desk unless it's a big consultative sale like a kitchen or a bathroom model or something like that. So getting a little bit more into the technology, this is where we were and where we are now, right? So prior to this new generation of FIRST phone that we have, we were on a pretty pure Windows mobile native app stack. So that meant everything was on the device was native C#. Backend ran out of our Tomcat grid and was primarily Java SOAP web services. Went through a refresh of the devices a couple years ago. That's a case study unto itself. But long story short, we moved from all of our apps and code base that was in the thick client C# world to most of them came to lightweight JavaScript, HTML5 kind of architecture applications. So we elected for most things not to go native Android for a couple different reasons. We do have some core apps that interact with the hardware at a low layer that are Android native, but most of the stack that we have is HTML5, JavaScript. And then back end, we do pretty much pick your own. Most of our code base is still Java, Spring being one of the prevalent options there, but we've got some Go, some Ruby, some Node. It's 9 or 10 different frameworks that teams use throughout the company. So one specific thing that this helped us out with, so I'm a big Men in Black fan, so I use some of that terminology here. So the old and busted architecture that we had, this is not all that uncommon for a retailer or anywhere with a big real estate footprint. We have basically servers in every store, so we don't just have one server farm, right? We've got kind of a distributed compute network. And that brings a lot of challenges because we have 2,000 stores, which is basically 2,000 independent servers to sync up and make sure that your devices match the server, match what you've got running centrally, and all the services kind of interact and play well together. Otherwise, the associates get a fractured experience. Some stores may or may not work. The devices may or may not work. Another thing, too, is that because of that type of environment, the rollouts that we had felt like forever. So we were back in waterfall project management too. So you get done with a 6 to 12 month project and it takes you another 2 months to get all of your code rolled out to all the devices across the chain. So as we rolled out this device, it coupled up pretty nicely with when we were rolling out Cloud Foundry at the Home Depot. So we moved most of the assets from the device from the local store server into our PCF distribution. That's we've got a kind of a hybrid approach there, but instead of going through the server and brokering the transactions, we go to Cloud Foundry, which really meant the big win for us immediately was that our deployment went from 6 weeks to get a change out to the store to 2 days. At the time, I was managing our store device application platforms team, and we would get, for some of the security stuff where we would change the icons and access levels on the skin of the device, we'd get those almost every week or 2 weeks. So, we only want the front-end associates to see the checkout icon, or we only want the merchandising associates to see the pack-down icon. So we were basically constantly monitoring and running deployments of that. So for that to take us from 6 weeks to 2 days was huge, right? That saves so much toil on the team. We could have done some of that in the old architecture with a central server, but PCF just let us do it so much faster, and it was so much more seamless for the developers to just cut over one day, pilot and test, and then go to chain the next day. So the case study here, our order fulfillment application, which is the app that store associates use to make sure that they're picking the right products for your orders if you order an online order and pick it up in the store. This was a stack that we elected to use there, right? So on the device, we use Apache Cordova, which, if you're not familiar with that, that basically allows JavaScript to interact with some of the native components on the Android device, provides some caching plugins, which allows things to render a little bit more quickly. And then for the actual application, we use Node.js on the back end and Angular 2 on the front end. Doing it again now, we'd probably do React on the front end, but it was what it was, and Angular worked out all right, but it felt a little bulky for some of the stuff we were doing. It was nice having Node and Angular because you didn't have a whole lot of context switching going from Java to JavaScript, right? So as you're staying in JavaScript the whole time, it helps mentally stay in that frame of mind. And then in terms of application updating, right? So when we want to roll a new version of either a piece of functionality or the entire order fulfillment app, we had to roll an application redirector that basically, depending on the store and the time of rollout and what kind of pilots and A/B testing we have going on at a given time, you don't necessarily want every single device in every single store pointing to the same version. So we had to roll an application redirector where we're basically all requests run through this redirector, and we keep a configuration centrally which version which store is pointed to, and we can flip that through a UI toggle no problem rather than having to roll out an entire new application to the store. Some pain points. So this is not cache money, although that is always a problem, right, when you're doing app development in enterprise. But really the caching on the device, I briefly mentioned that we use some Cordova caching libraries, which really helped out, but it's not quite as seamless as we can be, and I'll talk a little bit about the more broad problem of caching on what's next, but that was something we definitely struggled through as we were doing the development, making it so that things loaded fastly on the endpoints when we're not using native app code. Another one too, if you've used JavaScript, especially on mobile, bloat is a huge problem. So you get a ton of, your JavaScript serialization is huge, and it's difficult to manage, so we definitely had to use Minify everywhere that we did that, right? So shrink down the JavaScript code so that your transmission and packets are as small and tidy as possible. So single sign-on, no one has problems with single sign-on and auth, right? No? In a large enterprise, we've got custom single sign-on code, we've got vendor pieces, managing 2,000 stores and 400,000 associates. That's a lot of accounts, and there's a lot of complexity there, a lot of by default complexity due to the nature of the problem and self-inflicted complexity. So there's a lot of pain points that we had to resolve around that. Also, a big difference from the enterprise mobile device to your personal cell phone is it's not one-to-one. A lot of the security models that are implemented in mobile are based on, this is my device, I'm the one using it, there's no swapping in and out. With our devices, they sit on the rack in the store, and any associate could log on to any device. So it's basically like a fresh device every time they pick it up, which brings some challenges with it. One other thing too, the users sometimes know what they want, but sometimes they don't, right? So we didn't have a very robust analytics solution for generating and getting the user feedback until we got everything to a central place, right? And we leverage Google Analytics to determine user behavior, user patterns, be able to iterate and improve as we go through. So not just necessarily what they're asking for, but the way they're actually using the application, the flows that they're mostly leveraging and making. That was really powerful for us to be able to do that once we got everything onto Cloud Foundry. So what's next? On the caching point, right, we want to get to a broader content delivery network, right? I just found this image on Google. I thought it was pretty funny, but we've had a number of fiber line cuts. You run into those problems. The resiliency that we need at the stores for the devices, we have to make sure that stores are up and ready to take your money because that's how we stay in business. So we still have some figuring out to do on how we maintain the resilience through hard cuts or anything like that. And then also we want to, so we built this application redirector before the route service was available on PCF. We've had PCF now for a couple years, so earlier on in the stages, and some of the tooling and technology that's available now that makes things really easy for software engineers to do just wasn't there. So we still got a fair amount of componentry that we built ourselves that we want to kind of strip out and get rid of and replace with stuff that's available from the platform by default. What else? I think that's it. So I promised I'd try to get you out of here quick because I know this is the last session. I will try to throw these at you if you've got questions. So if anybody wants one of these, I don't know if I can make it all the way to the back, but any questions? No, we have a limited number of foundations. It's not that's one kind of what's next problem, not necessarily from the device perspective, but from the PCF perspective. And I know my understanding, talking to a lot of customers, is that multi-foundation management. What does that look like? Is there going to be a component or something like that? So that's definitely something we're considering and we're interested in. But yeah, foundation sprawl is kind of an idea and a concern that we're looking to address. Do you want a hammer or a bucket?
I'll take a
bucket. Bucket? Okay. What else?
So how many devices?
We've got, it's 2,000 stores, so it's a pretty large footprint of devices that we've got deployed to the stores. We use, the models they're Zebra rugged devices, so we're running Android, a specific version of, it's available from Google and the Android developer ecosystem, but there's some custom componentry that Zebra puts in there to make sure that it operates well. It's a fully certified distribution of Android, so they're not exactly devices that you could walk into Verizon or AT&T and buy off the shelf, but they're close enough to where you could deploy apps on the device and your personal phone with no problem. I'm scared to throw one at you, but if you want one, you can come up and grab it. Hammer? All right, I'll save you a hammer. What else? Yes? So how do we manage our user continuity? Do you mean in terms of like the application difference, or yeah? So one thing that was particularly challenging, right, is if I go back to the actual devices. Does anything there jump out as something that maybe, besides just Windows, but keyboard, exactly. So that was a huge complaint that we got early on. So what we did, our approach there was, with the applications that we had on the old device, when we first rolled out the new device, we tried to maintain the app flow look and feel as close as we could possibly to the old. Obviously there's some skinning issues and they looked a little bit differently, but we tried to maintain, the app that you use to do your inventory pack downs looks and feels and flows almost exactly this. So we tried not to couple the device change with brand new applications. Obviously, we wanted to do that eventually because you get a lot of power from doing, more Android native code. But So that was one thing that we did, and we had, it was a large orchestrated test effort to make sure that we were doing that in the right way. And then really the only training that we had on these, they had a booklet, but we did a 2.5-minute training video of, kind of a walkthrough of this is what the main couple apps, like you tap here, that kind of thing. And that was surprisingly successful, right? It was more successful than we had seen with, computer-based training and some of the other manual-based training stuff that we had done as well. So it was really like one of these icons when you launch a new device at a store, it's like top is a training video. So you launch it, it plays on the device, and it shows you how to use the device step by step. So that was the general approach there. But we did get a lot of complaints about the keyboard. Yes. So how did we solve the single sign-on challenges? So what we ended up doing was we've got on the device we have a profile. It's kind of a user profile service that runs that basically when on the login event, it refreshes everything based on the user who's logging in the state session, right? So we've got a backend service that basically auths the user. So that's not necessarily the problem. It was building that service that allows seamless transition from the custom launcher screen that we have and in between applications. So basically, we've got a toolkit if you're building an app at Home Depot for Home Depot where that user service is provided by default. So if you just hook into that, we have example code that is just a snippet that once you've got that in, you inherit the identity from the system, and then you can use that in your app as you need to. Does that answer the question? Okay. Okay, yeah. If you need more detail, feel free to come up after. Yeah. Yes?
So does the app talk to the enterprise systems, or do we have any caching?
So there's some caching just through the Cordova components that we use, but it's the apps generally talk to enterprise, but they can talk to anything, right? So they can talk to external services that are running anywhere. We've got some networking and security measures in place so that that's not just as straightforward as that, but they can talk to anything on the enterprise system or the internet system as long as they need to. So latency issues, that's a good question. They're not necessarily, so there's not a whole lot of heavy back-end interaction apps with slow processing times. Like we're not hitting like a SAP system or anything from this really. It's more web services that are on PCF that are caching. So if there is anything that's needing to do that, the service itself will typically prefetch or pre-cache whatever it needs on the service, so the service can respond pretty quickly. But it's kind of a case-by-case basis on the application teams themselves.
How long was your rollout period for the application?
For the application, so there are still teams that are developing applications for this. So we're in a continual rollout basis for the apps. We see as we continue to iterate and improve and incorporate more lines of business into the mobile device, then it's basically more or less continual, which is why that the 6-week to 2-day rollout is huge, because a lot of things are moving more mobile first, right, in terms of design process. And since all the associates have these devices, then we're getting a bigger uptake. So if we still had that 6-week rollout cadence, that would block us a lot, and we'd have to staff up to support that, the rollout management. Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about the feature intake process?
Yeah, so how do we do feature intake process? So there's the way that we organize, we've got a mobile device platform team, which once the devices were deployed, there's a relatively low velocity of intake from that. We've tried to make things as much self-service as possible. So we use pivotal tracker for tracking our backlogs and whatnot. So it's typically a request that comes in any way it could come in, drive-by, email. We have a light intake site where customers, our internal software engineers, can fill out a request, but they can come in anyway. But then we work with the requester to get the story groomed, and we prioritize it based on the backlog that we're running. Does that answer the question? Okay. What else? All right, well, thanks for the time. I appreciate it. Everyone have a safe trip home.